So welcome everyone back to the healing room. Tonight's topic of conversation is archetypes. Some of you may know about them. The archetype is a concept that was brought into our collective awareness by Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychologist. And it was his contention that these archetypes exist in the collective unconscious and of humankind, and that these archetypes have been around for a very, very long time, since the beginning of man, and they continue to grow according to our own evolution. So we can create new archetypes each day, each month, each year as we develop on this planet in this existence. And so these archetypes are very significant. I have spoken a lot about the subconscious mind in these healing rooms and how important it is to come to know your subconscious mind, because it's the subconscious mind and its content that's running the show, not the conscious mind. So if you imagine the iceberg, what we are truly conscious and aware of is a very small amount, that which is visible right above the ocean's surface. But below the surface, where the iceberg is, there's this huge mass below our conscious awareness. And that mass is running the show. 95 to 98, 99% of our lives is run by this subconscious mind. So according to Jung, we reside within a psyche, the conscious, the personal subconscious, and the collective unconscious. So we're here to explore our personal subconscious through the collective, through these archetypes that reside in the collective unconscious. So these archetypes are primordial patterns and abstract forces that govern, direct, and shape our lives. Primordial patterns, abstract forces that govern, direct, and shape our lives. They become our personality. So oftentimes we say, oh, this is just the way I am. The reality is it's not true at all. There are these various deficient aspects, shadow aspects of these archetypes that are operating in the background and motivating us to do what we do, behave the way we behave, be in relationships the way we are in relationships. They're controlling the strings. And so when we do the inner work, we begin to divulge, to reveal, to become known to the archetypes, and they will communicate with us and inform us of why they are present. So about 30 years ago was when I was introduced to the archetypes by my inner voice, when one day it said, it's time to integrate the archetypes. And I didn't know much about them at that point in time. So my inner voice directed me on this journey. And the first step of the journey was to call upon the archetypal plane of existence. So the intention is to focalize one's consciousness on the archetypal plane. The next step, my inner voice said, was to call upon those archetypes that are most present and prevalent in my life. To call upon those archetypes that are most present in my life. I really had no awareness of any of this until I was directed in this way. So I did that, and 15 archetypes showed up, one after another. And the next step was to do this exercise with the first archetype. So the first archetype was the victim, which many of us are probably familiar with. Some of us have experienced it in an acute situation. Others may be experiencing it in a chronic situation We can run the victim archetype our whole life and even for lifetimes before we break it, before we break through and go to the higher octave of the archetype. So I asked the victim, as I was guided by my inner voice, why did I call you into my life? So archetypes are vibrational patterns. They don't just show up out of nowhere. We have to be a vibrational match for the archetype in order for it to be present. So we are actually magnetizing and enlivening the archetype. We magnetize it from the collective unconscious, and then we enliven it by being in that mindset. So my inner voice said, ask why you called it into your life. And so I did just that, and it said, well, when you were younger, you felt victimized as a child, and you felt like you were abused. So because of that experience, you activated us into your unconscious and conscious life, because I did feel like a victim through this experience of abuse. And I said, okay, great, that is spot on. And then my inner voice said, ask it what the lesson is of the archetype. What is the lesson you have to bring to me? And it said the lesson relates to power and authority, because anyone who is in the victim mindset, the power and authority is external, it's outside of us. So the cause of my internal state is some other person, some other event, some other experience. Therefore, the point of power and authority is outside of my being. And so the lesson to be learned is how to be one's own authority and how to command one's own power rather than relegating it to the external world. Because the external world is simply always giving us back whatever we are projecting into it from the unconscious, from our personal subconscious. So, in order to have power, this archetype continued, one has to take 100% responsibility for being cause of life, of existence. 100% responsibility for being cause, realizing the external world is the result. So when I take full responsibility for being cause, I am realizing that the archetype of the victim, I embody all of it, both the victim and the victimizer. Otherwise, it would be lopsided. So because we are souls that have been incarnate thousands upon thousands of times, some of us, we have been in every role in existence. There is nothing in the world where we did not experience it. So there's nothing to judge, there's nothing to be a victim of, and there's nothing to victimize. So once you understand that within this being is the collection of all experiences and all existence, therefore, I am the authority, I am the creator, I am the generator of reality 100%. I'm not a victim of it. So, in understanding this, the power comes back to the self. So, Jung said that the goal of life is to realize the true self, the soul self, the God self. It's not something that we're looking for, we're already it. But there are all these layers of the non-self that are covering the true self. So in communicating with the victim archetype, I came to realize that I have been in all experiences in this body, in a body, in all experiences in this reality. Therefore, I am neither victim nor victimizer. So I neutralize this reality. I neutralize the victim archetype with this understanding, which is the key. We want to go to a neutral stance, non-reactivity, which allows us to respond in the present moment. We no longer have to react from the past or the future. We simply be present from this moment. And so when we do this archetypal work, we begin to integrate that which is disintegrated. We begin to make whole that which is fractured and fractioned. So I understood the lesson to be learned from the victim archetype. And my inner voice then said, ask the archetype if you are ready to be integrating it. Ask the archetype, am I ready to integrate you? And the archetype's response was an interesting one. Each one, so this exercise that I'm sharing with you is unique to each person. How you will commune or communicate with the archetypes is your own creation. I looked online for this type of archetypal integration. I couldn't find it anywhere, nothing close. So we each have access to source, to our higher self, to be able to commune with these energies in whatever way works for us. I am just giving you the way that was shown to me, but you can color it, you can direct it in whatever way works for you. But the questions are good prompts in order to activate the archetype and be in relation to the archetype. So my inner voice then said, ask the archetype if you're ready to integrate it. And the archetype said, when you become aware of something in your subconscious, it means you are ready to integrate. So when you see something, when you become aware of something, it's the first stage of integration of a shadow. And so when the archetype speaks to you, you have to notice in your body how it feels, the idea of letting go of the shadow aspect. How does it feel for me to let go of this idea that I'm a victim of my childhood? Am I ready, willing, and able 100% to let it go and take full responsibility for the fact that the reality that I am the creator of my own life? No one is creating life for me. No one's doing anything to me. Everyone is an actor in my own stage, in my own production, for my own doing. Am I ready, willing, and able to integrate this shadow aspect? Now, if the mind chimes in and says, but wait, it really did happen. And if I let it go and do as you say, then that means they are scot-free. So that is a mental resistance to the integration. And if you notice that, you then have to counsel that part of yourself, that fragment that wants to hold on to being a victim. The issue with being in the negative shadow state of an archetype is that the archetype is siphoning your life force energy, the battery of your being. Because everything in the subconscious requires energy, right? Everything requires energy. So if there are unknown shadows that are operating on the dysfunctional aspect of the archetype, we're losing energy every single day. So it behooves us to pay attention to the guidance from our higher selves, from the archetypes, so that we can integrate the shadows and move to the next level. No longer lose energy, but allow the higher octave of the archetype to recycle our energy. So the archetype said, yes, you are ready to integrate the shadow of the victim as long as you're willing to take 100% responsibility for being cause, for being the creator of your own life and existence. And so my inner voice said, before you integrate the archetype, ask the archetype for a gift. Ask it for a gift. And so I did that, and the archetype said, the gift that I can give you is the capacity to possess your own power and be your own authority, to be your own center point, where the center of existence is within you, not outside of you. Now, the gift aspect could be different for each person. So that is unique to each one of us. Then my inner voice said, now allow it to integrate into your heart, thank it for all of its teachings, its lessons, and integrate the archetype into your heart. So here now is a fragment of ourselves that was in the subconscious that is now conscious and now integrated. So we've neutralized the shadow aspect of the victim. Then my inner voice said the next step is to call upon the higher octave of the victim archetype. And so I called upon the higher octave. I didn't know what it was. And what presented itself was the spiritual warrior who knows itself, who knows its power, who knows its truth. And so I brought that archetype deep into my being, into my energy system, and I allowed it to integrate. And as it did so, the next archetype presented itself. So that is an example of how we can work with a particular archetype, a particular entity or energy or pattern in our lives, so that we may go from the shadow aspect to the light aspect, from the deficient aspect to the exalted aspect. We're always wanting to raise our frequency, to raise our consciousness in this world, in this reality. That is the soul work, to go to the higher octaves of our psychology. For example, instead of being in a state of anger, go into a place of gratitude. Instead of fear, going towards courage. We're constantly doing the inner work to support us in elevating our consciousness and our frequency, that we may live more and more into our soul self, our true self. And so the process of accomplishing that, according to Jung, was the individuation process. Individuation, becoming our true self, our true essence. And in order to do that, we have to dissolve all the conditioning that we have been fed, that we have bought into, that we considered ourself. Conditioning from education, government, from religion, from lineage, right? All these different types of conditionings we accepted as our self. And it's useful in the beginning because then we have something to work with. But ultimately, the goal is to go into these archetypal patterns, and some of them may be very, very ingrained, especially if it's in our lineage. We have to go into these archetypal patterns, commune with them, receive the gifts, the lessons for ourselves, for our lineage, integrate them, and then go to the higher octave. This is what life is truly about. This is what we're here to do. And this is why it's important not to get caught up in the external world, right? The bread and circus of all that's going on outside of us. Remember, the authority, the power is not outside of us. The power is within. And we have so many entities, positive, enlightened archetypes that we can call upon whenever we are in need of support. How often I call upon the angels, to be present in my life, the masters, the ascended masters, right? We have all these cartoons and all these movies that talk about these superheroes, right? Where do you think these superheroes come from? They come from the collective unconscious. We have access to all of this. Not sure if you all heard of that story of the mother who found her child under a car, and collected the strength to lift the car up and pull the child away from that car. Now, how in the world does a woman have the ability to lift a car? So these are the invisible friends that we have access to when we allow ourselves to open up, to be receptive to the world invisible, to ask for support, ask for assistance, right? To realize that we are never alone, we are forever connected. So there's also other archetypes that you may be familiar with. So there's also the prostitute, right? So the prostitute has to do with like selling our souls to the devil, right? That's like this typical idea of the prostitute archetype, where we give away our essence for that which doesn't deserve our essence, for something that may be illusory, something in the material world. So this prostitute archetype truly relates to giving something of value away that should be more sacred or contained to the self. There's the magician, the king, the caregiver, the priest or priestess, the loner, the wounded child, the artist, the bully, the jester, the addict, the sage, the martyr, the mystic, the saboteur. Many of us can get very attached to that saboteur. And so this is a really important archetype that I work with a lot with my clients, of how to move beyond creating situations in one's life that one does not wish to experience. Why do I keep creating this or having this experience over and over again? I get a job and then I lose it within a certain period of time, even though I'm doing great work. I don't understand. And then when you look deeper, there's the realization that the shadow of the saboteur is behind the loss of that job. And so we have to go in and commune with the saboteur and say, hey, why did I call you into my life? And then you connect in your own unique way, asking the questions and seeing what arises uniquely for you. Now, the mind may come in and say, we're just making all of this stuff up. And your response to the mind is, everything is made up in this world. So what I am hearing is real and I'm going to trust it. So sometimes when we do this type of work, we have to put the mind in its place and we have to strengthen the muscle of trust and faith, knowing that what we are doing is real, very real, even though we don't have proof per se. So after I did the 15 archetypal integrations, the next day I had so much energy, because all that energy that was going towards maintaining all those archetypes in my subconscious mind, the shadow aspect, all that energy was released and returned back to me. So this is just a small drop in the bucket of the conversation of archetypes that hopefully will inspire you to read more about it, do some research, notice which archetypes may be alive inside of you, both positive and negative. But we really want to go to the shadow aspects of these archetypes so that we can integrate them, learn the lessons, and have that much more of our vital force available to us for the healing of our body, mind, and soul.